Welcome, friends, to this episode of the Sync Your Life podcast. Today, I'm joined by my new friend, Joanna Krysiak. She's coming to us from Poland, which is just so cool. As we're recording this, it's just around noon my time, but it's 5 her time. So we're in totally different time zones, two different parts of the world, but we're connecting today on the topic of breath work. If you've been listening to this show for any amount of time, you know that this is an area of struggle for me. So I'm excited to learn more alongside you today, to ask more questions, to have her even facilitate some breathwork techniques for us today. We're going to talk about how stress really does impact the body. We're going to talk about ways that we can downregulate, ways that we can really take control. You know, a lot of times I think we are stressed because we want to be in control. We don't realize that the stress is within our control. So we're going to be talking about all of that today. So I'm going to let her introduce herself. I find that's usually best. So I would love to hear more from you, Joanna. Please introduce yourself to my audience. Tell us a little bit more about who you are and why you do what you do.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Jenny, for having me. It's honestly such an honor. And my name, like you guys know, is Joanna Krysiak, and I am an expert in breath work, mostly for well-being and managing stress. That is really my area of expertise and my huge passion because it has completely changed my life in so many ways. I now work with many women who are mostly type A personalities, struggle with perfectionism and over controlling, and because of that they also have lots of stress and anxiety and a dysregulated nervous system, and they overall just feel that impact of that stress in their both physical and their mental well-being. So I have had a amazing experience with breathwork, and it has completely changed my life in so many ways, shapes, or forms, because every time I try to explain how breathwork has changed my life, so I never have the words for it to articulate it perfectly. But it really led me to wanting to help more people because it has shifted my life in so many different ways. So I've done multiple breathwork certifications, and I really now have this amazing, unique approach where I combine two different breathwork techniques when I work with my clients to help them really manage that stress and learn how to let go of that anxiety and actually achieve inner peace in their minds and bodies in a natural, effective, and sustainable way, because you can always use your breath every day in every way. And that's what I love about it the most, is just because it's so accessible and so simple to use once you learn how to do it. And that's what I really love about breathwork, and that's why I'm on this path to help share it with the world, because it still boggles my mind how we are not taught this stuff in school.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I was just telling you offline, and I'll share with my audience that this is, like I said, an area of struggle for me for sure. And I have to share this story because my dear friend Jen, who's also my yoga instructor, she's actually been on the show before as well. She is constantly laughing at me, and she's constantly reminding me to just breathe. I am a very type A personality. I'm very want to be in control. I remember telling her, this was years ago. My husband and I were traveling to Italy. We had a long flight ahead of us, a whole day of traveling. And I am absolutely, I won't say terrified, but I'm very scared of airplanes for whatever reason. Like for whatever reason, my anxiety goes through the roof when I'm having to fly. And I remember telling her oh, Jen, I'm so stressed out about this trip, and oh, it's going to be such a long flight. And she looked at me and she was like, just breathe. And she's like, you're holding on to your breath. Like, don't you sense that as you're talking to me, you're literally, your whole body is changing. Your physiology is literally, your whole body's tensing up, right? And she's like, and then you get on that airplane and the same thing's happening. Just by her saying that, it gave me the awareness to realize that I was almost doing it to myself. So I want to talk about that. We're going to talk about awareness. We're going to talk about, maybe you could share more about, what are most people doing? That, people who could benefit from breath work, people who could kind of benefit from understanding this level of awareness of their body. So my first question for you is almost a trick question, is who needs breath work?
Oh man, everyone is what the simplest answer would be. But the people who really need breathwork the most are, just like you said, people who just struggle with stress, and people who just notice that maybe they're doing a bunch of different stuff for their health. Because I know that this was my story. I also have a background in personal training and nutrition. So I was doing all the healthy things, working out, eating healthy, taking care of my gut, trying to sleep the 8 hours and doing all these stuff, but I still felt like something was off, and I couldn't really always pinpoint what it was. And I also found breathwork actually through a podcast, which is kind of a first full circle moment. And I was learning about how, yeah, we have all these like stuck emotions and how our day-to-day lives in our 21st century and our bodies just aren't adapted to manage stress in the way that our ancestors used to, because our ancestors used to have short periods of stress. So either there was a tiger chasing them or there was famine, but this was rather short and it was mostly physical stress. And in our day-to-day lives today, like even as you explained, Jenny, it's mostly stress that we're making, quote unquote, making up in our minds, right? So it's mostly mental stress, but it affects our bodies the same way physical stress does. So we still release all those same hormones. We still have all those same responses as if there was a tiger chasing us 24/7, literally. And when we don't actually learn how to, first of all, release that stress and how to actually bring down our stress levels, we are constantly in this loop. So, like you said, like you are holding your breath. And when you hold your breath, it is a stressor for your body. So, your stress influences how you breathe, and how you breathe influences your stress. So, you kind of fall into this loop and into this cycle of being stressed and breathing improperly because you're stressed, and because you're breathing not properly, you're perpetuating that stress, right? So breathwork is really for the person who feels like they're taking care of many aspects of their life and they're trying to be healthy and they're trying to really live a more balanced life, but they're still struggling with perfectionism. They're still struggling with that stress, with the anxiety, with overwhelm, and they just want to break. They just want to break from their racing mind, and they want to learn how to actually chill and how to actually just rest. Like, I'm telling you, I never thought that just learning how to rest is going to be such a huge life changer for me. I never thought, because I was also the person who was always on the go, who could literally work 16 hours a day and was always, on top of everything. And finally it came all crashing and burning down to the grounds, and that's where really breathwork saved me. So that's whose breathwork is really for the person who's feeling stressed and overwhelmed and feeling some lingering anxiety, feeling that they have some unprocessed emotions, and really want to learn how to take their power back and really learn how to manage that in the most simple, basic, and fundamental way.
Yeah, you mentioned so much just now. I want to make sure that I stop on a couple things. One is, you were talking about the different types of stress, right? Like, it's not just work stress, it's not just relationship stress. Like, there are so many other factors. There's environmental stressors, right? Like, I always when I'm working with my clients, I'm always like, yeah, you don't realize that, like, sometimes just the things that you're around, like the physical beauty products that you're putting on your skin, like, you're putting your body into a more stressful state. And so I love that you mentioned that. And I love that you also mentioned perfectionism, because I find that this is something that a lot of women struggle with. You mentioned, like, we wear a lot of hats, like, we're taking care of our kids. A lot of times we're also working. We have, aging parents, we have friendships to keep, afloat, like all these different things that are happening at once. And it's so easy to, I think, as women, especially, to kind of put ourselves on the back burner and to find ourselves all of a sudden in a state of overwhelm, right? Like, oh my gosh, like all the things. And now what do I do? Right. And it goes into almost like panic. I have a friend of mine who recently reached out to me, and I would say she's very similar to me, kind of this perfectionist type A personality. And she started having issues where she was having panic attacks in her workouts. She was starting to have panic attacks just day to day, and even some tingling sensations. And she was like, what's going on? Like, I've never had this before. And I was working with my friend who is a gut health naturopath. We're actually filming a little course on gut health. And I said, hey, while I have you on this call, I want to ask you about my friend. Like, here's what my friend is going through. And I thought she was going to respond with, she needs this test, or maybe she needs to look into this deficiency. Like, I thought she was going to give me some sort of like doctor expert advice. And her answer back to me was, it sounds to me like maybe there's a perfectionism issue, and there's some things we need to let go of. And there's some down regulation that needs to be happening if she's in that state of anxiety. And I thought, well, duh, like, why does this this is such a recurring theme. And so I want to ask, you've mentioned different techniques, and I want to make sure we definitely get into those. But from a basic perspective, I want people on the other end of this to understand that breath work doesn't always have to mean meditation, right? Sometimes I know that was something that I came up against when we owned our gym, we had regular yoga classes, and we would have a lot of people would sort of skip the yoga, right? Like, oh, it's yoga day. Like, I
Mhm.
don't go on yoga day, right? Because they were afraid of maybe what
Yeah.
they thought was like a spiritual thing, or they
Mhm.
thought there had to be like a meditation component. Like breath work does not have to be that. It can just be like controlling the breath and doing like a physical activity to really control the breath. So I'd love for you to touch on that as well.
Yes, yes, I absolutely love this. And breathwork can be whatever you want it to be. And that's what I love about it. Like, if you want it to be a spiritual, meditative practice for you, it can absolutely be that. But breathwork doesn't have to be just that. Breathwork is actually very commonly used with athletes. And that is because your breath impacts everything that goes on in your body on a physiological level. Yeah, like you said, people usually hear breath work and think of yoga or like holotropic breath work and these mystical experiences. But I always say, in the way that I always explain what is breath work, I like to simply just explain it that breath work is literally just a practice of conscious breathing in a certain pattern, in a certain speed and depth, with a clear intention of what you want to achieve. So if, like you said, your friend who had different, sensations, and from your explanation of what she was going through, it sounds to me like she was in a constant state of hyperventilation. And those are the two main differentiators of the two breathwork types. So we have conscious hyperventilation. So this is breathing with a lot more air, breathing a lot faster and a lot deeper than we are in our day-to-day lives to get into a hyperventilated state. And we can dive into a little bit deeper the benefits and what that really looks like. But there's a second breathwork technique, which is reduced volume breathing. So breathing with less air than we're used to actually increase our CO2 levels. So what this friend was also going through when it comes to like perfectionism and having that constant anxiety, that also causes us to hyperventilate unconsciously. Because what do we do when we're wanting to be perfect? We usually tense up our muscles. We're usually breathing from our upper chest. We're breathing very quickly, very shallow, which is hyperventilating. And we don't
Mhm.
even realize this, that we're doing this in our day-to-day lives. You're sitting in front of your computer and you're breathing as if you would be running a marathon. So no wonder your body's completely confused, right? Because you have this internal stress, but you're not moving in any way, right? Because it's all just mental stress. It's all psychological stress. It's not very physical. So it's, especially since she was, feeling this also during her workouts, indicates that, when she was breathing with more air, she was perpetuating this
This feeling.
hyperventilated state, right? Yeah, this
Mhm.
hyperventilated state, this feeling that she was really in. So those are the two main differentiators when it comes to breathwork and the different breathwork styles. And I would love to go into which one we could use for our
Yeah.
benefits and what we really want to, what are the benefits and what are the different aspects of both.
Yes, and I want to make sure we touch on that. But before we do, I have one other sort of question that I think people might help people understand why this is so important before we dive into the techniques. And that is how this is connected to the mind and body. Like
Mm,
what does doing this practice do for your mind and body? And maybe it's obvious, but another quick sort of anecdote of my own story. I found myself, this was probably about 10 years ago, in the middle of what I would call now an anxiety attack.
mm,
Just a total state of like frozen. Like I felt like my mind was going way faster than my body could keep up. And
mm-hmm.
I literally froze up physically. And I remember I went through this series. It's almost like, you want help, but you don't know how to get help because you have to help yourself right in that moment.
Yeah.
And so I remember I reached out, I called my mom, and this is to no shame to my mom, right? We were all doing our best. But my mom's answer to me was, well, just chill, like just calm down. And I was like, like I
Yeah.
almost went into like a worse state of fight or flight, It's like,
Yeah.
but I can't calm down. And of course she didn't know, but so I thought I sat there in this moment. I was home alone at the time, and I was like, I don't know who else to call. I called my brother, and my brother is he has his master's in psychology. He's very into this kind of stuff, and I wasn't even thinking about the breathwork piece. I just was like, I think I'm having a panic attack. I don't know what's going on. And he said, okay. He goes, just listen to my voice. And
Mm,
he walked me through what I think you're going to probably do something similar to this here shortly. he just said, okay, I want you to inhale for 1, 2, 3, 4. I want you to hold it. And he started doing, and at the very beginning, I was like, I can't do that. Like, I can't slow down. I can't, I was just totally in a panic mode. And he said, no, no, no. He's like, just listen to my voice and make your breath match my voice. And what I noticed was the very beginning, it was like very impossible, almost impossible for me to get my mind to slow down enough to listen to his instructions and to actually do it. But by the time we got through, I'll say 8 or 10 rounds of it, I was like, I felt this sense of relief. Right. And so I say this story because I think it's important for people to know that, like, we've said it, but I want people to picture it, right? Like, you have the ability to really down regulate yourself, your thoughts, your feelings, the state of fight or flight, the tension, through controlling that breath. Obviously, we're human beings, and so we breathe. I mean, that's where, if we're alive, we're breathing. But to come to step into the awareness that we actually have control over that. And by slowing down the breath, we can slow down sort of our nervous system. We can slow down our brain. I would love for you to kind of touch on that, because I want people to understand that before we go into the techniques.
Of course. So this is perfect because my motto literally for life is that we can breathe to survive, or we can use our breath to thrive. And that is because our breath is literally the remote control to our nervous system. And I love that you touched on this, and I love the way that you explain it through your story, because what our breath really is it is part of our autonomic nervous system. So our nervous system is divided into two parts. We have our somatic nervous system, which controls movement and muscle contractions and all that good stuff. And then we also have our autonomic nervous system, which is automatic. So these are all the things that are this part of our nervous system controls things like our eye movement, our breath, our heartbeat, our digestion. So all the stuff that we don't have to think about. We take thousands of breaths a day and we don't even have to think about it. And that's amazing how amazing our bodies actually are. It does everything for us where we don't even have to think about it. And the amazing part about the breath is that our breath is the only part of our autonomic nervous system that we can actually consciously control. You can't consciously control your digestion, you can't consciously control your heart rate, but you can consciously control your breath. And we are actually the only beings on earth that have this ability. No other mammal can actually do this. No other being on this planet has that ability to actually consciously control their breath. So another amazing part of the autonomic nervous system is that everything has an effect on itself. So every single part of the autonomic nervous system, so the heart rate, the digestion, the fight or flight response, the hormones that get secreted and all that stuff, they all have an impact on each other. So it's kind of like a domino effect. One can't live without the other. So when you have very, very quick, short breaths, it's going to signal your heart to start beating faster. It's going to signal your digestion to stop. It's going to make your brain waves a lot higher into that beta brainwave state. So beta is the brain waves where we are logically thinking, creating lots of thoughts in our minds, and it kind of creates this never-ending cycle, just like I said before. But when we can slow down our breath, when we can start breathing through our nose, just like your brother instructed you, we can actually downregulate our heart rate. We can turn on our digestion. We can slow our brain waves down to alpha, which is more a rested, relaxed state of mind. So this is why breathwork is so powerful. It's because it's a bottom-up approach. So we're not trying to fix things through our mind, fix things through our thoughts, like for an example with behavioral therapy, right? Where we're trying to think our way into doing things differently. We're actually changing our physiologically. We're changing our inner state that then has an impact on our outer state. So this is one of the most amazing things about breathwork, and what I love about it the most is that we're really working with the foundations, really working with the very, very roots of what is causing the stress, what is causing the anxiety, what is causing the panic attack. And that is why it is so effective. Because, it's just like you can't put a building on quicksand, right? So same thing with breathwork. Breathwork is the strong roots, the strong foundations to a healthy, happy life.
Yeah, that was so good. That description was so good. It's interesting because, I've been working with hundreds of women in the last 3 years on their hormone health. And usually they come to me because either they're not seeing results in their health and fitness and they feel like they're doing all the things and nothing's working, or they come to me because they feel like their check engine light's flashing and they go to their doctor and their doctor says they're normal, or they don't do the, enough testing. I'll just stop there. But regardless, that's usually where we start, right? And a lot of times I find that there's usually one or two things at play, most commonly, not always. One is blood sugar regulation. So this issue of how women eat, usually not enough protein. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but blood sugar regulation is one. The other is cortisol, right? Like this management of stress, which is exactly what you're referring to. And then I just have to kind of throw this in too for my listeners. If you're over the age of 35 or so, and you're looking at potentially being in those sort of perimenopausal years, we've talked about this till I'm blue in the face, so I won't repeat myself too much, but we know that your adrenals become a little bit more taxed during that age of life because now they're compensating for sex hormone production, the sex hormone production that's not happening now in your ovaries during perimenopause, right? So that's when a lot of women can start to complain about low energy, they're not sleeping as well. Well, it's all related to your cortisol, which is exactly what we're talking about here. When we're talking about fight or flight, we're talking about this stress response. In our modern society, to kind of circle back to, we're getting notifications constantly on our phones, through social media. Our kids need us, right? Like there's so many things that we're doing that we don't realize, kind of what you were saying in the beginning. We might not be chased by a bear, but in small ways, our body sees all those notifications as these little miniature bears. It's like, so we're seeing more of them throughout the day, right? And so our body is kind of in this state of stress. And so I love that you just said that, because the first thing I thought of when you said, down regulating the breath also helps. You said the heart rate, it also helps digestion. And so the first thing that came to my mind was the fact that another big complaint that I get from women is constipation issues and issues with digestion and all that kind of stuff. And so I can't help but think, after hearing you say that, right? Like if here we are, just these big train wrecks of balls of stress, especially in perimenopause, if we're dealing with this cortisol issue and we're really struggling to downregulate our digestive system, it makes total sense that our digestive system would be in this state of lockup, that it would be in this state of like feeling stuck. So does that sound right to you?
That is so perfect. And I love that you pinpointed that. So I'm just going to circle back a little bit to what you said before about how there's so many different things that actually cause us smaller stressors, but they build up. So actually being chased by a bear is a lot less damaging to our health than, all these little stressors combined in our day-to-day lives. And actually I have an amazing example of one of my clients that I actually work with. And just to show how breathwork literally changes so much in our physiology, she absolutely loves like house music. And she listened to a lot of house music when she was like getting ready for work and prepping. And she actually had a lot of like road rage whenever she would drive to work. And we've been in our breathwork practice for about, I would say, 5 months. And she comes to me and she's like, Joanna, I have to tell you this. You're going to absolutely love this. I was getting ready for work and I was listening to this house music and I was just noticing that it just caused like this weird feeling in my body. And I never really thought of it because it was just like my routine. I always did this. And even just like a little thing, like the music that you listen to impacts your nervous system. And she said, I turned on this more like relaxing, like the kind of music that we listen to in our breath sessions. And I just noticed I had so much less anxiety when I was at work and my road rage was so much better. And just like this little shift that happened because she was so much more aware of her nervous system and which state she's in, because she felt that peace and calmness in a breathwork session. She could now pinpoint what was the thing that was actually causing her to have that dysregulation in her body, which was so cool to me. And I just love examples like that. And I have them all the time with my clients. So that was such a cool way that I also saw that these little things can actually impact our nervous systems in a really, really big way. So that's the first thing. The second thing, like you said, like all these little things, when they add up, they cause a lot of mismatch in our body and cause a lot of dysregulation, even in our digestion and also in our cortisol and our insulin levels. And as you probably know, and I'm sure you listeners have heard this many times on this podcast, is that our insulin and our cortisol levels are really the basis of our whole hormone pyramid, right? So our insulin and our cortisol really dictate how the rest of our hormones are really looking. And especially when it comes to cortisol and insulin, they are very connected. So they both influence each other many, many ways. And I actually also just had a client not recently that she also came back to me after years of personal training and trying to having different diet shifts and, eating keto and trying more paleo approach and just really doing everything she could to manage her insulin levels, because she does have insulin sensitivity, and is really taking a very conscious approach to not go into diabetes, because that's also what her parents have gone through and stuff. So she's really consciously doing everything she can to not perpetuate that cycle. And she came to me, and we've been breathing for about 2 months. And she also said, like, Joanna, like, I haven't really changed anything like in my fitness regimen or in my nutrition, and my blood work came back so much better than it has before. And I was like, of course it did, because you're managing your cortisol. You have less of that cortisol, and it's more balanced in your body. So it's influencing also your insulin levels. So that's what I love about breathwork, is that it's really taking our bodies from a very fundamental level. So different things that we're doing in our health can work so much better. And I've been through this too, where I, was doing all the health and fitness things, eating healthy, working out. But if I wasn't managing my stress, it kind of felt like it was for nothing, and it wasn't really giving me the benefits that it should have before, right? Same thing with the digestion. I love that you said this, because this is also for me a work in progress all the time when it comes to digestion and constipation. And it honestly breaks my heart how often and how common constipation is, just because we're so locked up with all the stress hormones and all the emotional tension that we hold in our bodies. And those influence our digestion in so many different ways. So an amazing breathwork exercise for mitigating constipation is holding your breath at the bottom for as long as you can. And this is actually something that I've been practicing for a very long time. And I've also, I've been very into gut health and digestion, and is taking the probiotics, eating the bone broth, and doing all the good stuff for the gut. But I still was having something that wasn't really working for me, and I was still having that constipation. And now, even when I do have those days where I do have that minor constipation, all I need to do is do some breath work, do some breath holds at the bottom. And actually, because you're holding your breath at the bottom, you actually dilate your blood vessels, so there's more blood flow to your internal organs and to your large intestine, so that your muscles can actually contract and work better, and actually release and contract in the parts where they're supposed to. And the digestion actually flows a lot better. So not only are you actually bringing down your stress levels, you're actually also influencing your gut on a mechanical level as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes total sense. I mean, and I love your analogy of kind of working from the inside out. I mean, that's a brilliant way of saying it. I want to make sure that we give people some tangible ways to do this. So I'd love for you to sort of touch on, you've mentioned these two different techniques that you use with your clients. Can you kind of go through those with us and tell us what that entails?
Yeah, of course. So there are so many different breathwork techniques. And I know that people come to me sometimes, you're like, oh, Joanna, which one's best? And I always say that there's a time and a place for them all. But the way that I like to differentiate breathwork and the two different types of breathwork is reduced volume breathing and conscious hyperventilation breathing. So reduced volume breathing is an approach that I used when someone has dysfunctional breath patterns. That means you are in a state of unconscious hyperventilation. So just like you said with your friend, right? So someone who has a lot of different health issues, a lot of different sleep issues as well. They're breathing too fast, too shallow, breathing mostly through their mouths. And reduced volume breathing is just like the name entails, it's reducing the volume of breath in which you're breathing with per minute. So your breathing is supposed to be a lot slower, a lot deeper, and a lot more quiet, and mostly through the nose. So through doing different breathwork exercises, we can literally start bringing our breath capacity down. So we're just breathing with less air per minute. And what that does is it raises our CO2 levels. Now, CO2 usually gets a really bad rep because we think of it as toxic, or, just like just a byproduct of breathing, but actually CO2 has a very important function in our body, because CO2 is not only the main reason why we actually have air hunger. So the reason why we breathe is because we have an elevated amount of CO2, not because we don't have enough oxygen. And this is something usually people get the other way around, just like we were talking before about the workouts, right? When we're actually breathing too much, we don't have enough CO2 for our oxygen to actually get into our cells, because we have these special molecules called hemoglobin that actually transport oxygen into our cells. And without CO2, that oxygen can't detach from the hemoglobin and go into our blood cells. So that transaction can't happen without the presence of CO2. So when we're in a state of conscious hyperventilation and we don't have enough CO2 in our bloodstream, we can't oxygenate our bodies properly. So what we're doing in reduced volume breathing exercises is we're bringing up that CO2 level so our bodies learn how to adapt to that CO2 better. Because when we're in a state of conscious hyperventilation, our bodies learn to adapt to that, right? And they keep breathing too much just because they get used to it so much. And what happens then is you become CO2 sensitive. So you're too sensitive to CO2. So just by holding your breath for a little while, you need to gasp for air, right? And when you feel that, and when you actually are in that state where it's called a hypoxia, so where you have not enough CO2 in your bloodstream for an extended period of time, it is actually directly correlated to how well you manage stress. So if you actually don't tolerate CO2, so you're very sensitive to CO2, you're also going to be very sensitive to any stressors. And if you learn how to upregulate your tolerance to CO2, you're also going to upregulate your tolerance to stress. So this is what we do in reduced volume breathing. We are kind of training your body. It's kind of like you're going to an internal breathing gym, right? You're strengthening those muscles, you're strengthening your body, you're learning how to tolerate more CO2 so that in your day-to-day life, you can actually tolerate stress better and your body is much more regulated and much more balanced. So that's what we do when it comes to reduced volume breathing. And this is a much more not balanced, that's maybe the wrong word, but this is a much more subtle and gentle approach than conscious hyperventilation breathing. So if you have a pretty regulated nervous system and you have pretty good breathing patterns, then you can incorporate a little bit more hyperventilation breathing. And hyperventilation breathing, just like the name suggests, is bringing yourself into that hyperventilated state, but you're doing this in a very conscious way and you're doing it very deliberately for a certain period of time, and you're doing it for a reason. You have an intention behind it, right? So this style is actually the style that I started with. And with this style, we're usually breathing through our mouth or a combination in through the mouth and through the nose, out through the mouth. And we're deeping usually a lot deeper, a lot faster, and with more air. So we actually exhale a lot of that CO2. And when we exhale a lot of that CO2, what actually happens is we shift what goes on in our minds and our bodies, because our whole body is in a much more alkaline state. And when that happens, we shift our brain waves as well. And what happens then is we have much more access to our subconscious, to our emotions, to our sense of safety, because we can switch off the prefrontal cortex. So the part of our mind that is actually meant to analyze and create information and create different thoughts. And with this style of breathing, you can actually not only activate your nervous system in a very specific way, because you are kind of stressing your body out, but just a little bit. So maybe stress isn't the right word. You're more activating your nervous system. Your nervous system is activated, slightly elevated, and at the same time, your body's very relaxed. So this is a very unique moment in time where your body is both activated and both relaxed at the same time. So both parts of your autonomic nervous system, the part where that is responsible for stress, the fight and flight mode, and the part of your body that is responsible for the rest and digest are activated at the same time. And this is very, very unique because this is a time where your body feels activated enough to release any pent-up stress, any pent-up emotions, traumas, tension, any stuck energy that is in your body. And at the same time, it is feeling safe enough for that to actually happen. So there is so much that happens actually in a conscious hyperventilation breathwork session that could honestly be in a podcast in and of itself, but for the meaning of this conversation, I think that's where I'm gonna take reins and put a hold on it.
Yeah. And so my question for you is this. I mean, I had written this down as a question I wanted to ask. I've heard Dr. Andrew Huberman, his podcast, he talks about the physiological sigh. Is that kind of what you're
Yes.
talking about with the hyperventilation? Can you give us an example of what that would look like?
Yeah, of course. So conscious hyperventilation is, for an example, so maybe taking 2 steps back. What Andrew Huberman teaches is kind of something in between, I would say, in between the conscious hyperventilation and the reduced volume breathing, because it's just using our breath in a little bit differently than in a conscious hyperventilation way. Because with conscious hyperventilation, we're usually breathing anywhere from 5 to an hour anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour. Sorry. So when we're breathing with conscious hyperventilation, we're usually breathing, for an example, in through the nose, out through the mouth in a very cyclical way. So without any pauses, without any stops, and they're both very vigorous and they're both very intentional, right? So we're not just breathing just like we would in our day to day, but we're actually moving the air in, pulling it in, and exhaling it. I wouldn't say forcefully, but intentionally out. So what Andrew Huberman does with the physiological sigh is also great, and I also actually do use it with clients as well. But the question is, for how long are you doing it? Or if you're using it just once or twice, just to kind of shift your state a little bit, that's a little bit different than, for an example, if you were to do that breath pattern for an hour or for an hour or 30 minutes or something like that, right? So that you kind of have to differentiate the two.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, I remember listening to him on a show one time, and he was talking about how sometimes he'll just sort of reset himself with that physiological science. So such a powerful thing. And it's something that I've started to do as well. And just as a sort of side note story, my 6-year-old is for whatever reason this year kindergarten's gotten to us. So we've had every virus possible. We've had every bug. And so just a few weeks ago, she had pneumonia, and she had to actually have an IV of fluids. This is totally, I promise it'll connect. And so, you know, a 6-year-old and a needle don't really go well together. So when they brought the IV needle in to do it, she looked at me with this face like, no way, mom. And so I was like, okay, you know, at first I'm thinking, okay, I'll hold her hand or I'll try to talk her through it. And then I realized, no, the best thing to do is just teach her how to breathe. And so as we're sitting there, I was just like, okay. And I kind of did like what my brother did with me. And I was just like, can you breathe in with mommy? And we would breathe in, we would breathe out. And this is something that I think for me, and I'm writing this down for myself right now, this is something that I want to teach my kids, because a lot of times it kind of comes back to this idea of like controlling, you know, like I can't control how they're going to feel about a situation, their emotions. I can't control their confidence level in some cases, right? When it comes to like things that happen at school or whatever, but I can teach them tools like this. Like I can teach them how to deal with the stress, how to sort of like downregulate themselves. And that was such a powerful moment, because I remember when they put it in, she didn't even notice it at first. She felt a pinch and she looked down and realized it was over, because she was so focused on listening to me breathe, which was so cool. But yeah, I wanted to ask about that, because I noticed too with my kids, a lot of times when they get worked up, it's so easy to notice, right? Like my 2-year-old, when she throws a tantrum and she gets all worked up, she starts crying. Usually, you know, let's say that she goes to sleep on my shoulder or she finally calms down. The way that I know that she's finally calmed down is when she gives me that sort of physiological sigh. When she's like, you know, that big breath where you're like, oh, and we're finally calm, right? And so that's what we're referring to. If you're listening to this and you're like, what are they talking about? We're talking about that, you know, that toddler sigh when they just kind of, they're finally over their tantrum, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. So
maybe
cool.
maybe I'll just explain a little bit for the folks who haven't listened to Andrew Huberman and don't know what a physiological sigh is. So physiological sigh is just taking 2 inhales and 1 exhale. And the first inhale is deep into the belly, and you want to fill your lungs to about 70-80% capacity. And then the last 20% is just a short little inhale into the chest. And then you want to take a nice long exhale out through the mouth. And what this does is it kind of makes your alveoli, so these little parts of your lungs that are responsible for the transaction of oxygen from your lungs to your blood cells, they kind of cause them to pop a little bit and open up a little bit more, because your lungs can get a little lazy, I guess you can say, and they kind of have like a little bit of the CO2 kind of lingering in there. And what this physiological sigh does is it really helps your lungs expand a little more and exhale the excess of CO2 and a little bit of that CO2 buildup that can happen. So this is also a great way to, regulate your stress response. And I always say, like, any breath work technique, like even if it's just noticing your breath, even if it's just, taking 2 inhales and 1 exhale, just like with the physiological sigh, anything that brings your awareness to your breath is already a huge success. Like, even if you're, like I always say, the first step is awareness, the second step is intention, and that leads to transformation, right? So intention, which is what we really want to achieve with our breath, attention, so just having awareness around our breath, and that intention plus attention equals transformation.
Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. I want you to help us figure out, like, okay, so now we know that this is something we need. We know that this is something that can help us in so many different ways. How do we make it a priority, and how do we make it an intention to make this part of our daily routine? Is this something that you schedule time for? Are you like waking up in the morning and doing, a practice of breath work? Are you doing it in the evening? Are you doing it throughout your day? Are you using different tools? Like, tell us all the things that can help us make this a priority for ourselves. And I'm saying that selfishly for myself.
I love that. I love that. So I'm a breathwork freak. So I absolutely do breathwork every single day in every way. So I'm just going to quickly guide you through like how I combine these two techniques with myself and with my clients as well. So like I said, with conscious hyperventilation breathing, I imagine it kind of as a little pampering that you do, right? So it's not a way that you want to breathe in your day-to-day life, but this is a great way to start your day, to end your day, to really let go of any stress, get out of your regular thinking mind, and kind of just like bring your body back to balance. And I always like to explain this style of breath work kind of as emptying your cup, because throughout the day we fill up our cup, throughout our lives we fill up our cup with different responsibilities, stress, anxieties, overwhelm, and all that stuff. And, we can just have a little bit of drop of someone saying something the wrong way, or our kids yelling, or something going wrong in our lives, as it always does, and our whole cup is going to overflow. So we don't really have a big window of tolerance for stress. We don't really have a lot of capacity for more stress in our lives without our nervous system being very dysregulated. But if we regularly empty out our cup through breath work, through conscious hyperventilation breath work, and bring our cup to 0, or at least even 50% is honestly a game changer for some people, right? So we bring that cup all the way down, then we can actually start our day kind of from like a fresh perspective. So I love doing conscious hyperventilation breath work first thing in the morning. It really helps me set myself for the day. Like I said, like really prep myself. So I also still live a very busy life, and I have a lot of responsibilities, lots of things going on, lots of things to manage. So I absolutely love using breathwork to really start my day and get myself set up for my whole entire day. Because that's another amazing thing about breathwork, is that when you're in the session and when you're doing breath work, you're not only regulating your nervous system during the session. So it's not like a massage that you're nice and relaxed during the massage, but once you step out of the massage place, everything can hit right back. But with breath work, you're actually priming your body for your whole entire day. So the work that you do in the session isn't only during the session, but it actually shows benefits long after the session. We actually have the science now to back this up. So that's the way I love using conscious hyperventilation breathing. I also do it for about 15 to 20 minutes. once a day in the morning. If sometimes I feel a little bit more emotions coming up or some frustration, overwhelm, then I like to take the time during the weekends to maybe do a little longer session to really let go and really reset my nervous system even more. And throughout the day, I love showing my clients and myself doing lots of reduced volume breathing. So even simple thing, like if you have a dog and you go on your walks, just noticing, like, are you walking with your mouth open? Can you close your mouth? Can you slow your breath down a little bit? Can you just be aware of the cooler air coming in through your nose and the warmer air coming out through your nose, and just slow it down a little bit? Just slow it down so the breath is so subtle that it's barely noticeable. And just noticing how your body is wanting to breathe a little bit more and you're kind of feeling that air hunger, but instead of taking a bigger breath, you just learn how to relax into it. And this is also so amazing that you can use your breath literally every day in every way. Like even if you're just sitting in traffic, you can bring your awareness to your breath. You can slow down your breath. And this is why I really love using reduced volume breathing, because with conscious hyperventilation, this isn't something that you can always do in your day to day. You want to be in a safe space. You want to be in a container where you can actually be able to release and process a lot of stuck emotions that can come up and a lot of stress that can come up. So this isn't necessarily the best breathwork technique to use in your day-to-day life when you're like at the office or something, but reduced volume breathing can actually give you very similar benefits and bring your body back into balance and kind of regulate your nervous system in a very subtle and barely noticeable way, because you can even be talking to someone and be regulating your nervous system. So like I said, breathing through your nose, breathing nice and slow, and breathing nice and deep. Those are the three things that we want to remember when we're breathing in our day to day. So I absolutely love teaching my clients this, because they even start noticing their breath by themselves and like everyday tasks, like even when they're checking their emails or they're washing their dishes, they just notice their breath and start breathing in a more calm way. And they just are able to see the benefits right there and right then and there.
Yeah. It's like a body reset, you know? I mean, I was just thinking, I listened to Brendon Burchard. He talks about this concept of transitions, you know, paying attention to the transitions in your day. Like when you enter the house from your work day, right? And you're stepping out of your work shoes and into your dad's shoes or your mom's shoes, right? Like he talks about, he uses doorways as his sort of triggers, right? He's entering a new doorway, he's transitioning into maybe a different role or a different relationship or a different whatever. And he actually uses tapping, but he also uses breath work to just kind of reset his body and reset his mind. It's so smart.
Yes, I actually do work with a lot of moms as well, and I actually have a nice little recorded session for them to use in the car on their way back home from work, or after they park into their parking lot before they step into the house, because you don't want to bring all that stuff that you accumulated from work and dump it on your kids. You want to, and usually when you do that, you have I don't have my own kids, but I just know from talking with clients that they then have, a lot of resentment towards themselves, and just like you don't want that. So breathwork, you literally sometimes all you need is 5 minutes and you can reset yourself. And I love that analogy with like kind of stepping into a new, leaving the past behind you and stepping into this new thing with your breath. So I love that.
Yeah. Well, every mom listening totally knows what you mean when you say, like, when you pull the car in the driveway, like I think every mom has that moment every day where we just want to sit in the car for like 5 minutes before we have to enter the house and do something, or before we have to enter the grocery store and do something or whatever, I just saw somebody post the other day. It was a little reel on Instagram, and it was this lady, and she was like, my most favorite time of the day. And she's just sitting in her driveway with the car running. So I totally get you on that one. That's funny. Yeah. And I think you're so right. I mean, to bring this around full circle, it starts with noticing, so if you can start noticing when you're holding onto your breath, or like you said, the mouth breathing thing, it's so funny because I have all these things spinning in my mind right now. I've done a lot of work in the last year. I've interviewed a couple people here on the podcast who've really been transformational for me in understanding oral health. And I promise I'm going to connect this, because one thing that we're learning, we're learning that my 6-year-old has a small mouth. She is struggling with like airway issues. I interviewed Meghna Dasani and Dr. Michelle Jorgensen. Both of them are dentists. and functional dentists, and they talk about this idea of like small mouths and how it impacts our breathing and all this kind of stuff. And so we're noticing so much, and mouth taping has been brought up to us, right? Like we've heard about that, so that we can encourage her to sleep and breathe through her nose and all this kind of stuff. But it is so true. Like if you really do pay attention to society, like if you're listening to this podcast and you're about ready to go into like your kid's school or grocery store or something, look around at people. Most people are breathing through their mouth. Like they're breathing out of their mouth, which means they're kind of automatically breathing in a state of fight or flight, right? Most likely it's shallow. It's not what you're describing, which is this more conscious, intentional breathing. I love this. And of course we can change our physiology by practicing, right? It's all about practicing. Because then when you're in those moments, like I know ever since I had that airplane moment with my, my friend Jen, now every time I get on the airplane, now it's a conscious effort. Now it's like, okay, Jenny, now we're going to make this intentional. We're going to make this, we're not going to freak out. We're going to get ahead of it, right? We're going to be proactive, and we're going to start breathing so that I can calm down. There's so much that has been said today. I just think that it's everything you've said has just been so powerful. I want to also give this analogy too in this story, just because I feel like it's so common, and it kind of relates to what I was just saying about noticing your breath. When I was a personal trainer and I was training people in the gym, it was always so interesting to me to see the number of people. It was always a very large percentage of people who, we would do a lot of strength training exercises, right? So squats, curls, all the things, shoulder presses, all the stuff with weights. Like 90% of people who take an exercise class or who are working with a trainer, in my case at least, 90% of people would stop the move, right? The workout move before the end of the workout move. So if the move was a minute, they would stop before it. If the move was 12 reps, they'd stop at 10. 90%. Like I saw this all the time. And it wasn't until my friend Jen made me aware of the breathing that I realized that it's not actually their strength that's giving out. It's their mind, and their mind is giving out because of their breath, because they're holding on to their breath. If you knew how many times I've seen somebody who's squatting and all of a sudden you look at them and their face is going red and you're like, oh my gosh, you're holding your breath, right? Like there's nothing I can say to you except just breathe, and I promise you can finish that rep, right? And that's, I want to share that as sort of our closing story, because I think that is the point, right? Like that is the point, that in our day-to-day lives, how many times are we coming up against something that we just need to breathe through, right? And it's affecting our hormones, it's affecting our sleep, it's affecting because of all that, it's affecting our relationships. Like the domino effect just carries forward. So you've given us so much stuff, and I know you're going to point us in the direction of extra tools or all the things that you have that people can do to find you and to learn more about what you're doing. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today and to share your expertise. Where can people find you? Where would you like them to reach out? Yeah,
thank you. It's such an honor. And just like to end exactly what you said is something that I love, and something that I honestly say to myself on a daily basis is, if you can breathe through it, you can get through it. So just leaving that with our folks listening on the other end. And so we literally just scraped the surface on this episode, and it was so amazing. So thank you again, Jen, for guiding and hosting this amazing episode. So you can find me on Instagram. That's where I love to hang out the most and where I'm most active. So like we started, I am actually from Poland, so you can find a lot of content, mixed content in English and in Polish. So don't be surprised if you hop on there and you see some content in Polish. So my handle is joanna.k. So that's JoJoanna.k. joanna.k. So you can find me there. And I do have a bunch of fun reels about breathwork and some fun information that you can find in there. And I also do have recorded IG lives when it comes to with the different sessions. They are in Polish. They are all in Polish. So whenever I do have a English speaking community, I love to offer a free one-on-one breathwork session. So it's a 30-minute session where we can come on, you will have a little breath consultation so we can see where your nervous system is at, how well you are tolerating CO2. We go through a few exercises to see where you're at and which approach is going to be best for you. And then we go into a nice mini breathwork session so you can feel the benefits and really feel what it's like to use your breath to thrive and not just survive. So I would love to leave you with the link into, I'm sure Jen will put them in the show notes for you. And yeah, I can't wait to connect. And if you have any questions and you want to elaborate on something, then feel free to DM me on IG. I love connecting with people on there. So I'm super, super excited to hear from you guys.
Excellent. Yes, as always, we'll link everything up in the show notes so that you guys can just swipe up. You can click on that to get the free session or link up with Joanna on Instagram. Thank you again, Joanna, for being here. I'm so glad we've connected. I know this is going to serve women in such an exceptional way. So again, thank you for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right, guys, until next time, talk soon. Bye-bye.